Hi, I'm Christopher, and this video is for you if you're interested in health span and longevity, and particularly if you're interested in the role of breath work in both health span, staying well for long, and living well and living long. So this is what this video is about. So tune in, dive deep, and thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and like and do that kind of thing and share it out into the world. Thank you. Now, health span and longevity occurs at a cellular level, the level of cellular signaling, and hormesis and the biology of optimal living reframes the problem from disease to cell signaling. How do we live well? How do we keep cellular signaling working really well so that we stay well? Let's begin with a fundamental reframing. Now, most of the chronic diseases that dominate modern life, which include cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, cancer, neurodegeneration, including dementia, diabetes, and all the metabolic syndromes that are out there, are not random and they're not rapid events. They're not like that. They are all the long-term consequences of disordered cellular signaling, mostly from suboptimal lifestyle, plus environmental impact, over decades. It takes decades to build these conditions. Now, at the cellular level, the body is constantly asking one question. Is this environment safe enough to grow, repair, and differentiate? Or must we conserve, defend, and survive? That's the question. And the answer to that one question is determined by cellular signals. And these cellular signals include things such as oxygen and carbon dioxide, and therefore how we're breathing. It's determined by energy availability as levels of ATP, and therefore how we're breathing. By mechanical loading from movement in gravity, how we're moving. And by inflammatory tone, how much inflammatory cytokines and so on are flooding through the system. And it's also determined by circadian timing. What is your relationship with solar rhythms? The cellular signaling is also determined by stress hormones. How much and how often do stress hormones flood through your system? Cell signaling is also determined by reactive oxygen species, how oxygen breaks down into much more reactive elements, which then impact protein construction, proteins and cell membranes. And it's impacted by mitogenic factors, how your mitochondria function. All of these are impacted by breathing. Now, breathing in conjunction with the cardiovascular system, that's your heart and your blood vessels and everything, how it's all blood is pumped around, and it's one continuity. All of that sits right at the center of this cellular signaling network. And this isn't metaphorical, this is biochemical, it's physiological. This internal and external environment safe enough to grow, repair, and differentiate is the question, remember? Or is this environment complicated so we must conserve, defend, and survive? What do your cells say in answer to this question? It depends on how that's impacting them, and you can alter that by how you breathe. Remember, stress is not the enemy. Stress is hormesis. It's just data. It's mismanaged stress that's the problem. Stress, properly understood, like I said, is just data. It's just information. What's happening? How much resource do I have to deal with it? What do I need to do? Now, of course, we can use short-term stressors of heat, saunas, cold immersion, hypoxia, holding a breath, mechanical strain, working hard, doing some weight training, and cognitive challenge, learning, and of metabolic demand. These are not damaging by default. They can be superbly hormetic, and they can build eustress, good developmental stress. In fact, they're essential for well-being, as this is the principle of hormesis. Dose-dependent, time-dependent, sublethal stressors build resilience and make us grow. But it has to be the right dose, because the right dose strengthens systems. Chronic, unrelenting stress degrades them. Now, modern life can, of course, create a perfect storm of degrading stress. Psychological stress without physical discharge or respite. Constant low-grade arousal without adequate restoration. Restoration is critical in this thing. Poor sleep patterns. That damages everything in the system. Sedentary behaviour, sitting around for hours and hours of the day. On top of that, dysregulated breathing. And then untrained minds with complex perceptual patterns that are constantly seeing threat. The result of this perfect storm is not resilience, it's maladaptation. It's heading straight for those diseases that we talked about. Now, right at the centre of all of this, of course, are your mitochondria. Now, mitochondria, 3.85 billion years ago, were a separate microorganism that got embedded or engulfed by a bigger cell. And the two worked out how to get on over about 1 billion years. They developed a committed relationship. And now, all living things, without exception, that's plants, animals, fungi, all of them without exception, evolved from that one last universal common ancestor called Luca, last universal common ancestor. So all of us are built on that same model, that same cellular model. And those mitochondria, which have rings of DNA, bacterial DNA, and the cell which has strings of DNA, those must talk to each other well. And if the cell signaling is compromised between those systems, if you like, then what happens is dysfunction. What happens is disease. What happens is the inability to produce sufficient life energy as the chemical molecule adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and it is ATP which runs all of those organisms. We run on ATP. Without exception, every movement, every thought, every feeling is powered by ATP. And ATP is dependent on the quality of the food, the quality of the cellular environment, and the quality of breath and the oxygen delivery, oxygen at the right time, at the right place, in the right time, supported by a carbon dioxide rich environment. If you mess with that physiology by habitual stress or by poor breath work, what you end up with is an acceleration of those diseases. And you end up without health span, and you end up without longevity. And this is what we're going to look at. How do we build health span and longevity? What role does breath work play in this? Now, the cellular stress pathways and breath are really important. So let's get specific, because specific breathing patterns influence oxygen delivery. And like I said, both too little and too much oxygen are problematic. Carbon dioxide, how it's built up in the system, the levels of carbon dioxide and how it's responded to in the system are critical. And blood and tissue acidity alkalinity regulation is important, as is mitochondrial efficiency. Now, the reactive oxygen species, the ROS, they're an important part of cellular signaling because any longevity-related pathways respond directly to these cellular signals. These signals include something called HIF1, which is hypoxia-inducible factor. In fact, there's 2 of them and a couple of varieties, but they're oxygen level sensors and they're activated by intermittent hypoxia. Now, when these are activated, they improve the growth of new capillaries in the body, angiogenesis, metabolic flexibility, and cellular repair. And they also shift cellular metabolism to glycolysis if they're strongly enough activated. And that can really implicate and amplify cancer cell production because cancers prefer glycolytic energy production. So this cell signaling is critical. Another one is AMPK, which is the master energy sensor, and it's activated by metabolic stress. It upregulates glucose uptake from your food and fatty acid oxidation for fuel, whilst improving insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial health. And if it's insufficient, it impairs the glucose uptake. Right? It leads to fat deposition, which if it's visceral fat, releases inflammatory cytokines which promote those diseases. And it leads to reduced insulin signaling, as a precursor to type 2 diabetes and atherosclerosis and other conditions. If there's too much of this cell signaling, it can suppress protein synthesis. That reduces muscle mass and makes you weaker. And it may lead to neuronal injury, degradation of the nerves. And it can help some cancer cells survive low energy environments. It can do this whilst suppressing tumours in other environments, in other cellular environments. So it's complex. Cell signaling is super complex. So it works in some situations. So in some environments it might suppress growth. In others it might enhance it. So once again, balance is critical and important. And we don't really want to be messing with this with inappropriate breath work. Now, mTOR is a major growth regulator. And excessive activation leads to accelerated aging directly. Appropriate mTOR cycling leads to growth and repair. And an insufficiency leads to the body not being able to grow, repair or adapt properly. So again, it has to be held in balance. And we're looking for this optimized cell signaling in all these different areas to support cell functioning, and through this support muscle growth and tissue maintenance and wound healing and tissue repair. All of these are critical. Optimized cell signaling supports neuroplasticity and learning and memory, as well as fertility and reproduction. So if we're messing with these systems, we're going to have less fertility, less reproductive capacity. So we want these systems optimized. Right? We want the metabolic flexibility this gives and the responsiveness in the system. So these signaling molecules are critical for our well-being. NRF2 is another cell signaling molecule. It's a kind of stress response switch, which is a gene controller. And it's activated by mild oxidative stress, so there's some reactive oxygen species bubbling around. And it upregulates antioxidant and detoxification systems. Part of its role is also repairing cellular damage and reducing inflammation and its effects, as well as maintaining mitochondrial well-being, mitochondrial health. When there's insufficient NRF2, we find oxidative damage, faster cellular aging, which is important because if our cells are aging, we're aging, much greater inflammation and increased risks of chronic disease. Now, breath is one of the few levers we can consciously use to dose these signals in a good way if we use intelligent breath work. And as you can see, the breath work practices must be precision oriented. They have to be. Otherwise, we're messing with something we don't understand. They also have to be bio-individual because each of us is unique. Then having a blunt sledgehammer where everybody does the same thing, you're sitting online and everybody's doing the same thing, it's not going to work. Now, hypoxia, carbon dioxide and metabolic health is really important with most modern humans because most modern humans are not hypoxic in the obvious sense, but they're functionally hypoxic at the cellular level. That means not enough oxygen in the cells, which is altering that cell signaling. And that's mostly because of chronic overbreathing, where people are breathing more than their mitochondria need them to. It's where breathing pattern disorders, which is the squeeze of respiratory muscles because of emotional suppression, leads to poor breathing. It's poor nasal breathing. It's shallow upper chest patterns. And that leads to low blood carbon dioxide and poor carbon dioxide regulation. And that leads to low oxygenation in the brain and the tissues from the Bohr effect, because carbon dioxide is not a waste gas. It's a key regulator of oxygen delivery. So when we look at sort of hemoglobin, which is the amazing molecule, it's billions of years old, by the way, that hemoglobin in your red blood cells, which carries oxygen, it changes shape. It's a shape-changing molecule, and it changes shape according to the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood. And the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood determines the acidity and alkalinity of the blood. So hemoglobin can pick up oxygen where there's a low carbon dioxide, like in the lungs, because carbon dioxide is going from the blood out into the lungs to be breathed out. And in that shape, which folds into because of the low carbon dioxide and the lower acidity, the greater alkalinity, it picks up oxygen. And that whizzes around the body. And down in the body where there's more carbon dioxide, it allows the oxygen to be released. And it's doing this shape-changing act depending on the amount of carbon dioxide in there. So it has to be the right amount. And of course, if it's the wrong amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, the hemoglobin can't let go of the oxygen, and your brain, your heart, and your organs are being deprived of oxygen. They're not getting the right amount. And when that's chronic, it leads to these long-term diseases of cardiovascular disorders, heart disease, of course, damage to the brain, and so forth. That's what causes them. And hypoxia is critical for building cancer as well. So this chronic kind of hypoxia from poor breathing and poor regulation becomes a massive problem in terms of impacting the trajectory of those diseases. It also increases sympathetic tone and drives insulin resistance and elevates inflammation. And all of this connects directly to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disorders, and cancer. All of it without exception. So how we breathe and how we do stress, how we respond to life leads to these kind of degenerative conditions. Now, if we want good metabolism, functional breathing is essential. And it restores optimal carbon dioxide levels. It restores efficient oxygen delivery. It restores parasympathetic dominance at rest, so we're not just in a sympathetic arousal state all the time. And it restores metabolic flexibility and the responsivity to cell signaling. And this is intelligent preventative medicine, not just a kind of wellness culture. It's really, really important for all our well-being. Now, there are 3 roles of breathwork in longevity. To work intelligently, breathwork must be contextual. It's got to be contextualized, and it must be bio-individualized. So again, like I said, everybody sitting on screen or in a class all doing the same thing is not bio-individualized. It's not going to work. It's not responding to our individual need, because we all have variable and different cell histories. Now, there are 3 distinct roles here, each with a different biological purpose. The first one, like I said, is functional breathing. And functional breathing is the foundation. And this is non-negotiable. If your breathing patterns are disordered, if your blood physiology is disordered, it's not going to work. Functional breathing includes nasal breathing, appropriate tidal volume, efficient diaphragmatic and respiratory muscle function. They have to work well and properly, as well as properly restored carbon dioxide balance, good blood physiology. So this appreciation and understanding of carbon dioxide is important. And it has to have effective cellular oxygenation, the right amount of oxygen at the right time, at the right place, and therefore the consequent life energy molecule, ATP production. And without this foundation, any kind of intense breath work becomes a damaging metabolic stressor. The foundation is necessary. Without the foundation, dysregulation increases. Without that foundation of functional breathing, longevity pathways are compromised. Now, intelligent, systematic breathwork is about restoring evolutionary norms. That's what it's about. It's about a return to well-being. Now, the second strategy is down-regulating breathwork, which is about repair and recovery. And the purpose essentially is to reduce your allostatic load. That means your body's necessity to be constantly managing stressors, managing environmental stressors, managing internal demands of thinking and complex feeling. This kind of breath work is there to improve sleep architecture and enhance lymphatic clearance, brain well-being. And it's there to support immune regulation and reduce inflammation. So this relax and restore type of breath work is essential after functional breathing. Okay, it also helps reduce amygdalic dominance, so we're not running in threat and fear the whole time. It encourages hyperfrontality, keeping the brain frontal cortex on. It encourages vagal tone enhancement, which is good, relaxed, clear data from the body up to the brain. It reduces cortisol and all its complications, and it improves heart rate variability and parasympathetic dominance. And this kind of second approach to breath work is, if you like, neurodegeneration prevention, cardiovascular recovery, and cellular health in terms of promoting optimal cell signaling. It also leads to healthy emotional regulation. Yeah, all of these are supported, and basically no recovery, no restoration equals no longevity and no well-being, in a nutshell. Now, the third type of breath work is upregulating breath work, which has to be built on the foundation of functional breathing and downregulation. And this is where we work with controlled stress. It's where hormesis comes alive, okay, where we're building purpose in a new way. Because we're stimulating mitochondrial biogenesis, we're making more and stronger mitochondria, we're improving stress tolerance, we're working with flexibility, metabolic flexibility and metabolic resilience. We're expanding our adaptive capacity, and we're expanding through working with intermittent hypoxia, changing blood gas levels intelligently, individually, in a way that works for our body, our cellular levels. And it does this by playing with carbon dioxide levels and oxygen levels with the breathwork practices. And it's playing with catecholamine spikes followed by recovery, right? Now, NRF2, HIF1 and the other cell signaling mechanisms that I talked about are then going to be activated and relaxed in a good way. The key principle, now upregulation like this without recovery accelerates aging. Upregulation with recovery builds resilience. Critical differences. Now, working within your window of tolerance, your window of tolerance is your balance between aroused and aroused too much and relaxed too much. It's not a defined number of breaths. And it requires breathing practice order resolution first. Working within your window of tolerance individually is critical. Now, sleep, breath, and the nervous system are a unified system. Longevity is not built by isolated interventions. It emerges from coherent systems. Everything in the body working well. Now, movement provides mechanical stress and metabolic demand. It has to be part of a well-being practice. Intelligent breath and breath work regulates gas exchange, autonomic tone, builds hormesis and optimal cell signaling. Sleep consolidates cellular repair, brain repair, memory and immune function. And breathing patterns influence both sleep onset, sleep depth, circadian hormone release, yeah? All of the qualities we're looking for, and overnight glycemic control, that's the blood glucose levels. Poor breathing equals poor sleep. Poor sleep equals poor breathing. Insulin resistance leads to inflammation and disease. And poor sleep leads to poor breathing. These are not negotiable equations. This is how you work. These are non-negotiables, and understanding them, if you want longevity and health span, this is not abstract stuff. It's measurable physiology that you can work with. And this is why it's so important to start moving into this new domain of disease prevention. Disease prevention through intelligent stress relationships, through intelligent cellular relationships. Now, of course, back in the old times in Chinese medical system, a doctor stopped getting paid when their client got sick, right? That's what happened because they'd failed at their job. Dr. Peter Attia is now producing Medicine 3, which is preventative medicine, and this is building on this work because cancer, cardiovascular disease, neurodegeneration and diabetes share common roots. And the common roots are poor cell signaling, chronic inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, autonomic imbalance. And all of this is contributed from lifestyle factors and stress. And breath work cannot replace medicine. We're not trying to. But it can shift the metabolic terrain. With mind training and breath training, we shift the metabolic terrain. We improve cell signaling. We delay the disease onset. And we enhance treatment if treatment is needed. And we enhance treatment outcomes if treatment is needed. The goal is not immortality, and I wouldn't say so. The goal is health span and lifespan together. Years lived with clarity, capacity, agency, and peak performance. That's what we're looking for, surely. So optimal living is not about avoiding stress. It's about relating intelligently to stress, and having key practices with which we can work with stress, because that relationship is based on discipline, it's based on procedural body-based practices. And breath gives us a daily diagnostic, a natural biometric, a regulatory lever, and a hormetic tool. Breath is the bridge between biology and choice. When breathing is functional, and when stress is dosed through practice, and when recovery is honoured and trained, restoration happens. And with restoration and autonomic flexibility, the body does what it's always done best, which is adapt, repair, and thrive. This is not just biohacking. It's remembering how living systems actually work and working well with them. And this is what we're looking at with Healthspan and Longevity and breathwork and mind skills, the meta skills in these domains. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Share the word out there.